Good day to you all, and thank you for joining this session from the Cloud Security Alliance. Today, we're going to be talking about the Cloud Controls Matrix, or CCM, and in particular, the implementation guidelines around the threat and vulnerability management domain. My name is Simon Leach. I'm a director within the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and today I'm joined by John. John, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Simon. Hello there. My name is John Ose. I am one of the authors of the CCM version 4.0 SSRM implementation guidelines. I work as an information security consultant within the financial services sector in the UK. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, John. So the agenda for this session today is to start off by giving a quick introduction into the Cloud Controls Matrix version 4. And then I'm going to hand on over to John, who's going to talk about the threat and vulnerability management control section and cover the shared security responsibility model, specifically for TVM. John's then going to talk about some of the security implementation best practices, and we'll finish off with a conclusion. So in terms of the Cloud Controls Matrix, CCM is an initiative that was started by the Cloud Security Alliance in 2010. It's a research-driven project which includes involvement by cloud customers, providers, and assurance professionals from across the globe and across different industry sectors. And it aims to provide a simplified approach to implementing, assessing, and compliance across different cloud environments. What makes the CCM particularly interesting is that it is mapped across different global regulations and security frameworks, including things like ISO 27001, ISO 27017, NIST cybersecurity framework, PCI DSS, and a number of regional frameworks as well. And it provides a clear overview of who is responsible for which functions when implementing a cloud delivery model. The CCM also talks about shared responsibilities, and it makes a delineation between what the cloud service provider is responsible for and what the cloud service consumer or customer is responsible for doing. And it looks at this from the perspective of both software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. CCM is also the backbone of the CSA STAR program, which provides a mechanism to assess and compare cloud service providers. There are different components of the CCM framework, and it's worth noting that the framework is available for download for free at the Cloud Security Alliance website, and the address is at the bottom of the slide. Some of the interesting parts of the framework include the core controls, so looking at the different controls that you would be expected to implement as a customer implementing a cloud environment, but also the implementation guidelines, and that's what we're focusing on in this series of presentations. CCM also includes mappings against some of the frameworks that I mentioned on the previous slide, and it also includes the CAIQ, or CAIQ, which is an assessment methodology that can be used to look at individual cloud service providers and the services and applications that they deliver, and can be used by customers to assess which one fits most appropriately for their needs. CCM also delivers auditing guidelines that can be used by cloud auditors to get a better and uniform understanding of how well a cloud provider is delivering against the requirements that have been set down by CCM. CCM itself is now running version 4, and this includes 17 separate security domains, and across those 17 domains, there are 197 controls. And these controls cover control applicability and ownership, so the process aspect. It covers architectural relevance, so cloud stack components, so the technology aspect, and also in terms of organizational relevance, so the people aspect. And if you look at the 17 separate domains, you'll see they're organized alphabetically, but they cover every aspect that needs to be considered from a cybersecurity, trust, and risk perspective, both across people, process, and technology. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about threat and vulnerability management. And for that portion of this presentation, I'd like to hand over to John.
Thank you, Simon, for that presentation. So I'll provide a quick overview of all the controls under the threat and vulnerability management TVM for short domain. Now, in total, there are 10 controls within the TVM domain. And these have been designed to help both the CSPs and the CSCs to proactively identify and mitigate threats and vulnerabilities in the cloud environment that may evolve and impact cloud assets. Firstly, and vitally important, is governance. We need to ensure that there is robust and adequate threat and vulnerability management policy and procedure in place, also including malware protection policy and procedure. And again, looking at this slide, looking at this controls, TVM 05 to TVM 10, the key message here is threats and vulnerabilities must be proactively identified on an ongoing basis via your vulnerability scanning and penetration testing of cloud assets. And crucially, and vitally important, I must emphasize this, all identified vulnerabilities must be logged, tracked to closure, and reported as per processes and procedures. In other words, remediation process. Now, managing security, risks, and controls in the cloud is a shared responsibility between the cloud service providers and cloud service consumers or customers. Now, looking at how this is shared between these two key stakeholders, both the CSPs and CSCs are typically responsible for implementing all the controls within the TVM domain. Now, the CSP typically are responsible for the identification, assessment, reporting, and remediation of vulnerabilities on the host infrastructure, network devices, virtualization technologies, operating systems, platform applications such as databases and web applications. On the other hand, the consumers are typically responsible for the identification, assessment, reporting, and remediation of vulnerabilities relating to applications, API security settings, and access misconfiguration. Now, it is vitally important that the CSPs and the CSC work together, collaboratively, handshake when necessary, handoff when necessary, to ensure that all the controls within the TVM domains are properly implemented, designed as documented, and crucially operated as documented to ensure that cloud assets are configured securely and consumed safely. Moving on. So over here, we have identified some best practices that will assist with the ongoing governance and management of your cloud threat and vulnerability program, so that your security teams can get the most or more comprehensive insight into all your cloud assets. And crucially, regardless of their short-lived nature, you can spin up a virtual machine, maybe within a couple of hours or days, it's gone. But once the program is set up and it's appropriately run, you can actually see everything within your asset. Now, the first risk we've identified is within the operational risks, is vulnerability lifecycle management. Now, often, cloud and enterprise environment are managed in silos, meaning that the cloud vulnerabilities are not considered within the IT management and can easily be missed. So how do we address this risk? Now, given that the vast majority of enterprises leverage cloud computing, cloud threat and vulnerability management is a requirement for holistic IT operation or protection. And crucially, cloud environment have become the norm. We know that it's always cloud first strategy for almost all organizations, and they need robust defenses. So these two controls within the TVM domain, that's TVM 01, which is threat and vulnerability management policy and procedure, and TVM 03, which is vulnerability remediation schedule, will help ensure that cloud vulnerability policies align with and are incorporated into enterprise security policies. Additionally, risks that are unique to public, private, and hybrid cloud environment are appropriately managed. Moving on to the next slide, which is around technical risks. We all know well the risks of malicious software. This software targets cloud platforms, and they can pose a significant threat to data, security, and integrity, especially with the emergence of new attack vectors like containerized malware, serverless exploit, and malware that actually affect or infect your virtual machines. Now, we've got a couple of controls there that can help mitigate this risk. So we've got TVM 02, which is malware protection policy and procedure, and TVM 08, which is vulnerability prioritization. Now, these two controls, if well implemented and operated as designed, will help ensure that the virtual machine's lifecycle procedures also address mandatory and appropriate anti-malware controls for all managed workloads, and critical vulnerabilities are appropriately mitigated. Now, over here, what we've done is we have mapped some controls in the TVM domain to the key stages of threat and vulnerability management lifecycle, from when you actually identify the vulnerability to when it's remediated or closed. So you can see the controls on the right of the screen and the traditional lifecycle on the left of the screen. So that will help you, be able to see clearly which control fits where in the lifecycle management process. Thank you. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, John, for the overview. So to conclude this session, I think with TVM, one important thing to note is that threat and vulnerability management is always going to be important. But if we compare that or contrast to some of the other domains within CCM, with some of the other domains, there's a very clear delineation between one particular control being handled by CSP and another particular control being handled by CSC. With the TVM domain, though, all of the controls or the responsibility for all of the controls is both within the CSP and the CSC domain. The difference is who is responsible for the control for which particular part of the technology stack. So, for example, as John mentioned at the start of the presentation, the responsibility for the controls for the CSC are more at the level of the applications that is being run or are being run on the technology stack, whereas the responsibility for the CSP is more around the infrastructure aspect of the technology stack. That said, it's really important that the CCM is used to map across the implementation controls. So to understand what aspects of the stack are necessary to be included in the approach to TVM, and that CSCs are able to understand how their CSPs have implemented these controls, and that CSPs should be able to document and explain that to their customers by maintaining up-to-date cakes and to be able to answer any questions that their CSCs may have around the implementation steps that have been explained in cake. It's also really important to understand how the threat and vulnerability management controls across the cloud environment can be mapped against and compared to similar controls within the enterprise environment, and to make sure that the cloud environment doesn't operate in a silo, as John mentioned, for both the CSC and the CSP. So it's really important that the CSCs can understand, leverage, and implement those TVM controls across a cloud platform or architecture, and also put that or compare that very closely to what happens within the enterprise space as well, so that threat and vulnerability management doesn't operate in a silo within the cloud environment and can be integrated and implemented in accordance with similar controls in the enterprise space as well. So if you have any questions around the topics that we've covered during this session, or if you would like to understand more about how the CSA CCM can be applied to your own organization, please feel free to reach out to the support email address that is listed on this slide. We've also included links here where you can download both the Cloud Control Matrix version 4 and the Implementation Guidelines version 2, as well as the CCM Lite and a Cake Lite approach that you can use within your own cloud implementations. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for attending this presentation, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.